guys, it's Christy. Welcome back. So today's video is actually the first in a series about how to finish that novel. So if you are in the position where you've been working on a novel for a really long time, but it's just really slow going, or you don't quite know how to get to that finish point, that finish line, then hopefully this series is going to be helpful for you. So I was actually asked by a subscriber, Heather, to talk a little bit about how I break down, this massive endeavor, which is writing a novel, into manageable tasks. When I started thinking about it, this is actually a strategy that I've learned from my career, actually, my day job, working in project management. I feel that there are a lot of things, tips and tricks that I've learned that have really helped my writing. And these are things that aren't necessarily common sense. Sometimes you don't know until someone tells you or teaches you. So these are tips and strategies on how to ultimately produce more. So with all that in mind, today's topic is going to be how to break down your novel into smaller, more manageable tasks, and how to estimate those tasks and get a feel for the effort involved in each of them. Okay, so a few reasons why this is going to be really helpful for you. Writing a novel can be really overwhelming. And number two, it can be really daunting to just forge ahead on a novel and not have, mile markers along the way to really indicate that you're still on the right path. Without them, it's easy to get off track. And number three, when you have smaller chunks lined out, it's easier to get a more realistic timeline for yourself. So it's really easy to feel like your novel's taking too long if you don't have some realistic expectations for, what's really involved in the process. And of course, some of these tasks may look different depending on, what genre you're writing and what kind of a writer you are. If, for example, if you're a plotter versus a pantser. So the life of a novel generally starts out with some sort of outline. Then you'll write your rough draft, you'll do a revision, you may run it by a critique partner and get their feedback, do another revision, send it to beta readers and get their feedback, do another revision. Then you may query your novel, and let's say that you're lucky enough to work with a literary agent and they give you feedback and you do another revision. And hopefully after all of that revision, your book finally gets published. But each of these phases of your novel can be broken down even further. So before I ever write a rough draft, I'll spend some time brainstorming. I may do some research. I'll generally compile my ideas into a 3-act structure, and that's before I lay out all of my story beats. And then from there, I'll generally start brainstorming scenes and getting a little bit more specific. I'll also start developing my characters. And all of that comes before the actual drafting phase. And the same thing goes for revision. There are a lot of different things that I do before I actually get started. I'll do a read through of my last draft and make notes. I'll spend some time brainstorming some different ideas. I may do some more research. I'll compile all of my notes into a checklist for myself. So my first piece of advice would be to identify all of the tasks that you're planning to do. So if you are more of a pantser and you don't really like to outline in those things, there may be other tasks that are important to you in terms of completing your novel. Maybe it might be putting together a Pinterest board or a playlist or whatever it is. So once you have an idea of each of the tasks that you plan to complete, you'll want to start to estimate them. And I wouldn't advise approaching it as in, I'm going to do this next week, or, I'll be finished in 2 weeks, and just leaving it really open like that. Instead, I would recommend trying to be more specific in terms of the number of hours or days it's going to take. And then you can make room in your schedule to accommodate that time, or it can just help you get a better sense of truly how long that's going to take you and what your timeline looks like. You know, if you don't necessarily have the flexibility of creating more time for your writing, that's just going to give you a better idea of what your timeline is. But if you do have the flexibility in your schedule, you can really accelerate things by giving yourself more time. So one thing you might be asking yourself is, how am I supposed to know how many hours it's going to take me to write this book? Aren't creative tasks harder to estimate? So it's actually not as hard as you might think. So let's say that you want to see how long it's going to take you to write your novel. So what I would suggest is the next time you sit down to write, set a timer and record the amount of time it takes you to write. So at the end of your writing session, you compare how many words you've just written against how long you've been writing. So this is where we dust off our old math skills if, like me, you've been out of school for a while. So let's say that I was able to write 1,000 words in an hour and I'm writing an 80,000 word book. So it's going to take me a total of 80 hours. So if I'm looking at 80 hours to write my 80,000 word novel and I'm able to write 7 hours every week, I'm looking at 11 and a half weeks to complete my novel. But if I was able to double my writing time and write for 14 hours every week, it would take me almost 6 weeks, which doesn't seem so bad, right? 6 weeks and I've completed a novel. You might be thinking, well, what about writer's block? What about days where, I don't produce as much? Things are always going to happen and nothing is ever going to go perfectly and exactly the way that you want it to. But the great thing about kind of approaching it like this in a very logical and straightforward way, just with math, is that you can always readjust. You can always recalculate that number based on where you are. You could do the same thing when it comes to revision as well. So if you record yourself revising a page in your novel, I would do this a few times so that you can get an average. Then compare that, however long it took you, compare that against how many pages total you need to revise in your novel. So this exercise is going to show you how long it'll take to complete your task and when you can expect to have it finished based on your individual schedule. So this method might sound a little bit rigid or mechanical to some creatives out there, but for me, I find it incredibly reassuring. While writing a novel is really difficult, it's also completely doable if you've got a great game plan. So that's all I have for this video. If you liked it, I really hope that you stay tuned for the other videos in this series coming soon. Definitely subscribe so that you don't miss them. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.